With more women, younger drivers, and people from a wider variety of backgrounds than ever before behind the wheel, how can trucking fleets adapt to better manage and retain today's increasingly diverse driver workforce? I'm Deborah Lockridge with HDT, and we'll dig into some answers, some of which might surprise you, on this episode of HDT Talks Trucking. Today I'm talking to Mark Murrell. He's president of CarriersEdge, which provides online driver training for the trucking industry, and he's also the co-creator of the Best Fleets to Drive For program. So welcome, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
So we spend a lot of time in trucking talking about how to bring more people into the industry, whether it's younger generations, more women, reaching out to minorities. But what do we do once we bring them into the industry, once we bring them into a trucking company? How do we make sure that we're retaining them? How do we make sure that, all of those diverse viewpoints and backgrounds can be great. They can bring new ideas and life to a team, but it also can mean more potential sources of friction and misunderstandings. So you've worked with some of the best fleets in the country for drivers as part of the Best Fleets to Drive For awards. Let's talk about some ways that those fleets are addressing some of these issues. Maybe a good place to start with might be that age difference area. We talk a lot about bringing in younger drivers. We've got a lot of drivers aging out, retiring. But I see memes all the time about, like the different work-life balance and work skills and work expectations among different generations. What do you see there with the fleets that you work for?
Yeah, I've seen those memes as well, and I always find them quite funny because they always have a theme of the younger people are so lazy and awful. But I always laugh because I remember when I was that age and people had those variations of jokes that were about us, and now we're the ones making those jokes. So the reality is that younger people of any generation approach work differently than people that are older, and part of that is when you're younger, they want to experience more of life and they want to have more balance in it, and then over time they settle down, they get more focused, they have other commitments, and things change. And so the baby boomers were called lazy when they were young, and then they got older and called the Gen Xers lazy, and now the Gen Xers are old and we're calling the millennials lazy. And the Zoomers, oh my God, they're the worst. But the reality is that it's always like that. And how do you manage that? Well, the first thing is to acknowledge that that's just part of life, and that you have to communicate with people in a way that resonates with them, find the ways to communicate that works for them. And a big part of that is to start by listening, to start by asking them and involving them in the conversation. And this is more of a broader comment beyond just straight diversity. But one of the things that we have said for years and years and years for fleets is to ask drivers what they want, ask drivers what they think about things. We hear over and over from fleets that they've got an open door policy. Any driver can talk to us. But that's a very passive approach, which is basically, I'm going to sit here and wait for you to come and tell me something. But it doesn't really work anymore. It's a starting point, but it works way better to actually be proactive and go out there and ask. We go to our drivers and ask them what they want. The fleets that do that have a much better response because they not only are making that effort, which is generally received pretty well by drivers when you're making the effort to do something, but it allows them to get to people that aren't necessarily going to come into the office and say something. You can get to a broader group of the driving pool and collect some of those opinions from people that wouldn't otherwise offer them. That can be very powerful because then you do start to collect those diverse opinions, those different ideas, those different senses, and you can avoid the blind spots that come up when you are only asking a very particular group of people, or when everybody has the same background and same mindset. That's where you get to problems because there's things that get missed. That friction that you mentioned in the workforce, yeah, that does come up, but that's a positive. That's a good thing. A lot of times when you look at disasters that happen in the world. And I have a book behind me on my bookshelf that is an evaluation of major failures, system failures, process failures, everything from power plant explosions down to the Oscar mix-up a few years ago. And the root cause in nearly every one of those things is a lack of diversity in the decision-making team. So people end up having blind spots where they don't see that there's a problem coming up, and then that problem comes up and bites them. So I encourage people to get those opinions, to include as much diversity as possible in the decision making and the feedback collection, and that will make a huge difference for younger generations, older generations, everybody.
What are some of the ways that fleets go out and do that they ask drivers,
That's changed a fair bit. It's moved. Pre-COVID, there was a range of different ways that people were doing it that would include some online and offline tools, some personal communications, some automated things. And after COVID, things kind of moved online, and it has sort of stuck that way, that it is largely automated, it's largely online surveys. So everybody pretty much is doing online surveys. We found this year, when we were evaluating the best fleets to drive for, that nearly every fleet that we looked at was doing online surveys as a way of collecting feedback from their driving force, to the point where it's almost too much. Drivers are starting to get survey burnout, right? They get too many surveys, and the participation rate has started to go down. The quality of the feedback has started to go down because of that. What really works better is a balance of approaches. So some online surveys, those are great. Some can be named, some anonymous, like a variety there. But also phone calls, town halls, that kind of direct outreach. So we used to see pre-COVID, we would see regularly people doing town halls at different terminals, or just getting together with their drivers kind of informally and saying, I want to get your feedback on this. There's 4 of you there. Hey, let's talk about this. I'm really curious what you think about this thing. That kind of stuff can work really well. We are starting to see the seeds of this coming back, the management outreach calls, where fleets will have a pool of drivers that each manager gets every week, and they have to just call them and check in on different things. And it's different drivers, kind of randomized. You get 5 this week, a different 5 next week. It's not that difficult to work into the schedule, and it can be a really great way to check in, take the temperature of what's happening in the workforce, and get some good ideas and uncover some problems that you may not be aware of. Very effective. So balancing all of those things ends up being the most effective way to collect good feedback and make sure that you get it in a timely fashion, in a way that you can actually use it.
It's not going to help if you do surveys but then don't actually use that information.
Okay, you hit on a very important part of it. Surveys, data collection, is really only the first step out of 3 that need to happen there. So yes, you want to get that feedback, you want to collect it, then absolutely do something about it. You're not going to do something about everything. You're going to do some things in the beginning. You'll pick the lowest hanging fruit and then start moving from there. But the third part of it that people often miss is actually sharing that back to the workforce. Say, okay, we got the feedback. Here are the things that we're going to do. And then a week later, a month later, whatever is appropriate. All right, we did this. Here's what we did. We changed this, or we've got this new policy, this new process as a result of your feedback. Close the loop that way. When people see that there is something happening, that they've made the effort to tell you something, you did something with it, and you can see that that change is happening, that becomes a bit of a flywheel where they will then give you more feedback and speak up more often and give you more ideas, and it can be something that really builds on itself nicely.
I remember talking to one fleet, and they also pointed out, and this is probably going to vary depending on the size of the fleet, but as much as possible, if drivers have expressed a concern about something and there's some reason that you can't address it or can't address it right now, to let them know that too. They're like, hey, we hear you, but it's we can't do it because of this, or it's going to take us some time, but here's what we're looking into.
100%. Yes, and that is a good point to bring up as well, is that, yes, even if you can't do something, you still have to communicate back. And sometimes that can be a more valuable discussion. Like, we can't do anything about this, and here's why. And that can lead to the discussion among drivers, where sometimes it will be a discussion about, well, what if we try this, or what if we do this other thing, and maybe we do something else that doesn't solve the problem, but maybe minimizes the effect of it in different ways. That communication is really important. And one of the things that the best fleets have found is that sharing with drivers the things they can't do, why they can't do it, or the failures, talking about those things more openly builds a lot more trust. So if you go to the drivers, if the only time you feedback to your drivers is when you say, okay, we've done this, we got your feedback and we did this one thing, and there's another thing that's coming up every single time you do the survey, you don't do anything about it and you don't address it, you don't talk about it, then people start to get suspicious. They wonder, why aren't you mentioning this? And so a good example is something like a pet policy, where there are absolutely reasons why fleets can't do pet policies sometimes. It's just not feasible depending on the type of freight they haul, the customers they serve. They may not be able to do it. But it's going to come up in driver surveys because drivers want to have pets. And especially as we get into a more diverse workforce, diversity and pet policies seem to go together, that people like to have pets. So if you can't do anything about it and you don't say anything, then people think you're just ignoring it. So we've seen fleets have these discussions with their drivers and do that really well and say, like, we would love to have a pet policy, here's why we can't. And if there's other ways around it, maybe you can't have pets in the truck, but you have some ability for everybody to get together at a social event and bring all of their pets that time. So you still have something that you can do to acknowledge that people want to have a pet on the road with them, but they can't do it when they go to their customer site. So talking about the things you can't do is as important as talking about the things you are doing. Absolutely.
So communication with drivers, always important, closing that loop, but also something that can really help address diverse workforces and those issues. What about, speaking of the age difference generations, what about the technology issue? I mean, I know from my own experience, balance kind of between boomers and Gen Xers, certain things with technology, it's not that I can't or don't want to learn to use it. I just don't have the same, it doesn't come as easily to me as someone who pretty much grew up with a computer in their pocket, like my daughter did. What are some things fleets seek sort of in that area as far as technology?
That's an interesting point. I think there's a bit of a mythology that older people are going to be slower with technology and newer people are going to grab it right away, and it is actually not borne out by the data from what we have seen. The bigger issue is, and what becomes more important to you as you get older, is how am I going to use this to make my life better? So you can look at new technology and it's slick and it's got bells and whistles and it's the most fun thing. But if you don't see some way that it's going to solve a problem for you, you're not going to be gravitating towards it. You're not going to take the time to work it into your daily routines. Whereas somebody who's younger may just be excited by the fact that they can do something cool, but they're not thinking about useful application of that technology. And that is relevant for the fleets because over the last 6 or 8 years, we've seen a flood of technology that is driver facing enter the industry. The kind of back office safety technology that really wasn't prevalent up until pretty recently. In the first 10 years that we did the Best Fleets program, there was next to no back office technology that drivers were involved with. It would be a dispatch system or a maintenance system, and that would be it. But now we've got the ELD, we've got dash cams and scorecards and all of these telematics things. The challenge for drivers and the challenge that fleets face is rolling these things out in a fashion that is purposeful and allows people to get used to them and make the most of them. So the safety people typically that are kind of leading a lot of this technology have been a little bit like kids at Christmas with all of this stuff, and there's so much of it. And we see fleets that have put in so many different systems, and done it so quickly that they haven't really taken the time to make the most out of any of them. And the feedback from drivers over the last 3 years has pretty consistently been, please slow down. Is so much new stuff. We've got so many things making noise in the cab because none of them are really optimized and they're not configured. So they got false positives on the cameras and they're binging every time I put the brakes on. And it's just inefficient. So that's where you get drivers saying, this doesn't work. We don't want this technology. And it can come off as an age thing where old people don't like the technology. Well, the new people are just ignoring those bells and they're not really paying attention. Younger people don't pay as much attention to it. It's still not working. So I would say absolutely we need to implement that technology, but do it in a more gradual, purposeful way and take the time to make the most out of one thing before moving on to something else, because you end up with too much stuff in there, drivers push back on it. And we've seen increasing feedback from drivers of all ages that the technology that's being added is a little bit too much too fast. They're not against it, they like the idea, they get the benefit, but you need to take the time to let them make the most of it, work it into their process. The company needs to understand how to use it effectively, then move on to the next thing.
It can get overwhelming.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we've talked a lot about getting younger drivers into the industry. Women drivers, another area where there's been, a much bigger push, I think, last 10 years or so, to bring in more women drivers. What are fleets doing there to help make sure that women are, their needs are being met, the fleet, that they like being in that fleet, they stay with the fleet? What are some things there?
A couple of things. Well, that's where the pet policy thing comes in, because over and over and over we see that companies that have good pet policies and allow drivers to take dogs on the road have a higher percentage of women drivers that stick around and are happier there. Women drivers like to have pets, and it's a broad generalization. Not every one of them wants to have a dog, but in general, there is definitely a connection there. So that's one of the things that fleets are doing. Anything that is going to improve security is a positive in that area. So panic buttons on the ELDs or inward-facing camera that can be turned on at the driver's discretion to record things or can externally record things. Fleets that are making provisions for parking, that's a huge issue. Dealing with that so that drivers don't have to deal with it. But the foundation of that is always interesting, because it has been this way ever since the first year that we did this program, when we started looking at what fleets can do to make life better for drivers and for women drivers. Everything that you do that makes things better for women drivers makes things better for every driver.
Sure.
Pet policy is great, security is great, dealing with parking, everybody wants those things. So if you provide a better workplace across all of those areas, it ends up being a place that women drivers are going to feel safer. The second part of that, and this applies to all kind of diversity or anybody that is sort of the non-traditional driver, give them a voice within the fleet. Trucking has got a fair bit of diversity in the workforce. Gender diversity is dropping a little bit from where it was in the immediate post-COVID times. It has dropped a little bit in the past couple of years, but one of the biggest things that you can do to help people stick around, feel good, and contribute to the company positively is give them a voice. And we are starting to see that in the best fleets now. So it's not enough that they try to hire women drivers. It is that they make sure that there's representation on the driver committees, make sure that they have a career path where women drivers can move into being a road trainer or a driver coach, and make sure they've got support in the office, make sure that they've got good diversity in the management team. And the fleets that do well in those areas end up having a more effective driving force. They end up being more productive fleets, and things get better for everybody. But the biggest thing is representation on committees and management teams and leadership. The trucking industry generally at the executive level does not have very much in the way of diversity. The lower you go, the more diversity there is. But you look at the top, it's still a bunch of bunch of people who look like me. It's a bunch of old white men. And that's where there's a real opportunity for improvement.
Yeah, I think see more in, I guess, kind of like middle management, in like safety and HR, but yeah, not a whole lot in that top position. So, and the companies that I have talked to where there are women in that top position, it's interesting. You know, they just have bring a different viewpoint when it comes to how women drivers or other women employees, a different perspective on it.
Well, we saw something interesting over the last, I guess, 10 years or so. For a while, we were seeing cases where there was fleets that were women-owned or women-led that didn't have much diversity, actually had a lower percentage of women drivers. And in a lot of cases, that was sort of a family kind of business, and
Right.
they were sort of the daughter who would take it over and kind of run it the same way that dad was running it, and it really wasn't appealing to anybody but the traditional driver. But in the past few years, that's changed, and we've seen some of the women-led companies really starting to have broader diversity programs across quite a wide range. And this year, 2 of our 3 overall winners, the best overall fleet for in the small carrier category and the overall winner out of the Hall of Fame, were both women-owned companies. And that's the first time that we've had that, but they've really showed that there's a lot of different things that people can be doing that can work really well and are good for the business as well.
Any sort of I don't know, innovative things that they've brought to the table that would be, I don't know, good for other people to know about, to possibly try.
Well, there's a lot. that could be the entire segment.
It could be a whole nother interview. We'll give a couple examples.
Yeah, so there's a few things that stuck out for me. I was just kind of reviewing the answers before we got on this and looking at the scoring for this year. And what I saw as a theme, I would say, is that support in the office. And it may be things like language diversity, where we've got people that speak different languages in the office that make better support for the drivers that are in the field. I saw a number of fleets, this kind of stuck out because it was unexpected, people in the office that are fluent in sign language, as we're starting to see diversity having a more diverse definition, where it is not just gender and ethnicity, but it's abilities as well. And we're seeing people with what would previously be sort of disqualifying disabilities, like deafness and some other disabilities, that are getting support and having some real success. And the companies that are doing really well are recognizing that there's a good pool of potential drivers there if they can get over that and figure out how to support them, give them the information that they need to be successful. So they've got staff who are fluent in different languages. They've got diversity in the management team, frontline management of ethnic diversity, gender diversity, and like I say, some people that are fluent in ASL. They've made accommodations for those. And that makes a real difference in providing a workplace where people feel that they can have success. They feel supported, and they feel like they can be successful there, and then they are not only building out their own career, but then they're referring others as well. They're talking to others within their community and bringing more people in. So that makes a huge difference.
Any other thoughts? We're kind of running out of time here, but kind of any other thoughts, advice on when it comes to managing a more diverse workforce?
I think it is something that every serious business needs to start looking at. I know there's a lot of noise publicly about this, and sort of a lot of headlines and talking points about it. But the reality is that trucking needs to start looking into different areas to find a pool of potential drivers. Pretty much every middle-aged white man who wants to drive a truck is driving a truck now. That pond is fished out. We need to go elsewhere. So anybody who is going to be successful over the next 10 years, 15 years, is going to have to start thinking about this, and it will look different for every organization, and it is going to make more sense to start with what's close at hand. So start with gender diversity. If you're in an area where there isn't a lot of ethnic diversity, then start with gender diversity. And if you're in an area where there's a lot of ethnic diversity, then start with that and build on those things. But everybody that's going to be successful is going to have to look at that and have a plan for it somehow. It's like you see all of these stories that every Fortune 500 has got an AI strategy right now. Well, every trucking company that is serious about being successful should be thinking about a diversity strategy and what they're doing about it. And it can't just be, well, we'll hire every able-bodied person who comes in. Well, what are you doing to attract that person? What are you doing to make their life better once they get there? What accommodations are you going to make? Are you going to change the menu at your barbecue for people that don't want to have hot dogs and hamburgers all the time? Are you going to change the way you manage your banquets and holidays and your stat holidays and things to accommodate them? Start thinking about those kind of things. And they're not difficult choices to make. They're not difficult changes to make, but they can be really impactful. And it's a matter of thinking about them and figuring out a plan for how you want to address them.
All right, great. Well, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
All right. Thanks for having me.
I've been talking to Mark Murrell. He's co-founder of CarriersEdge and the Best Fleets to Drive For program, about how fleets can find success by addressing the changing makeup of today's truck driver workforce. Don't forget to subscribe to HDT Talks Trucking on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, and check out our website, truckinginfo.com, where you'll find more great content and can subscribe to our newsletter.